We had a ton of comments and fantastic Twitter discussion following our NFBC episode from last week. On today's episode, we'll go through a ton of your comments and talk in depth about the pros and cons of having IL slots in leagues. Reuven and I debate the fantasy injured list next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Reuven Guy. How are you, Reuven?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. This is going to be a little bit of a different kind of podcast today. We are following up on our NFBC episode with Greg Ambrosius. We got a lot of great comments about it, and it really spurred some interesting discussion. Greg said, hey, why don't you poll the audience to talk about limited IL spots versus no IL spots? I had a poll. Reuven had a poll. Reuven, why don't you tell me how you worded yours, and I'll share how I worded mine.
Sure. Okay. So I worded it a little bit differently. I didn't even know you had posted it. And when I posted it, I just went straight to the jugular with this one because we actually spoke to Greg about putting in an IL slot for the NFBC. So my poll was, should the NFBC specifically, NFBC implement an IL slot or two for their competitions that could utilize them? And, Greg said that, we were probably, or Ariel was probably in the minority of wanting IL spots to be added to the NFBC or NFBC type formats. And as of when we're taping this, the poll is only 53% have said no, that they do not want to implement an IL slot, while 46% actually said that they would like it and they would want the NFBC to implement the IL slot, which is kind of interesting because it's a lot closer than I think Greg would have even thought.
Yeah, that's almost 50-50, 54% to 46%. It's pretty much a dead heat. Now, you worded that question in the way of should the NFBC change it? Right?
Correct.
I worded mine as well, but very differently. I said, what format is your preference? With limited IL spots, no IL spots. I did not reference the NFBC at all, just asking for what people prefer. I got a very different answer. 87% said with limited IL, 13% said no IL. So that's what I think people. I think people enjoy the limited IL spots. Now, when you're wording it as should the NFBC change, people who are in the NFBC who are used to a certain format, you're not going to see that many people that are going to want to change it. But I'm actually surprised that it was almost 50-50, which basically lends the discussion that I think people would appreciate it in general. Because anybody who plays the NFBC, it's almost 50-50. And for people who don't play the NFBC, they'd be much more interested in it.
Well, I also think that NFBC is one of the only formats that don't allow an access to an IL slot. I think almost every other format does allow you to either join a league that has or doesn't have an IL slot, so you're able to know what you get into, you're getting into. But the same thing, when you sign up for an NFBC, you know that there is no IL spots. You go into it knowing it, so you have to plan accordingly and you have to have your strategy accordingly. So, you can have your IL slots, but just not on the NFBC. So that's what it seems like right now, is that people would prefer to have the IL slots, just maybe not so much in the NFBC.
All right, so this is not a gang up on Greg episode or gang up on NFBC guys episode, but we do want to talk a little bit and more flesh this out in terms of the debate. And so we've got a lot of great Twitter comments, X comments that people gave, and we want to go through a bunch of these. I'm going to take the position of what the heck, you should have an IL. I'm very, very much for IL. Reuven, I believe you are, you're probably not, oh my God, I can't stand the IL, but you are indeed for not having it, right?
I'm for not having it. We actually are in a league together, a GDD league, and there was a vote this past year to possibly change it to actually try to have an IL slot, because right now it's just a regular NFBC format with no IL slots, and it's on a different platform completely. So actually, the vote ended up that we ended up not having the IL slot, and I voted against having the IL slot because I do think that I'm sort of a purist, a baseball purist, and I like the way the NFBC runs, and I don't think that an IL slot would actually help me personally. Is it a good idea to have it? maybe, but in the way that I play the game, I think it hurts the way I play the game, and that's the way I think a lot of people are voting
Yeah.
in the NFBC. If you think it hurts you or doesn't hurt or doesn't help you, then maybe that's why you voted one way or the other.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, to be honest, this is a personal preference. They're obviously fair either way, sort of. I still think that there's less of there's less variance when you have the IL spots, but it really does depend on preference. I mean, Derek Carty and I share a team in that league, and we're both very adamant that you need to have IL because we're both very big on the drafting part. So it plays to our preference. Well, anyways, let me read a couple of points, and we'll talk and debate some really good comments, really good suggestions. So let's just run with it. Chud says, hey, either a larger bench or IL spots, especially in 15. The strategy of when to hold guys, when to not, is not something that interests me at all. I've never looked at these situations and gone, yes. And MLB teams don't have to do it. I mean, that is true that in the MLB, you don't have to say, well, you've got your active roster. Well, because you've got IL, that's it. You do get to stash a guy on your 40-man on your IL. So it does reflect baseball more to have an IL, does it not?
Well, not yes and no, because you have to bring up people who are on your 40-man roster, because if you put for someone on the 15-day or 10-day IL, but if you transfer them to the 60-day IL, then you can bring someone who's not on the 40-man roster, quote unquote, going into the fab market and getting someone like that. So yes, the MLB teams do have to make a decision whether to put someone on the 15-day IL or the 60-day IL, because that does make a difference.
Yeah, no, good point, good point. History of Westeros says, would never play in a no-IL slots league. It's one of the best ways to tamp down the impact of bad luck. The least fun part of the game, and fun is always number one in my game. This guy obviously doesn't play in the NFBC. I think the NFBC is, I'm not saying they're losing players, but I think that they probably are losing some people who would not want to play because of that. Probably not that many, and Greg is very successful with the NFBC as it is, so it's a business decision not to change, but there are some people in general who like that. But take a look at this one.
And the fact that more people are signing up for NFBC now more than ever, obviously they don't really care about the fact that there's an IL slot or not.
Here's an interesting one from John Posma. Now, John Posma, as you might know, is a Hall of Fame NFBC player, fantastic player. We always value guys in the NFBC who are amazing. So John says, 15 less players in Fab Pool? Not fun. Figuring out IL eligible player timing? Not fun. He's giving both sides of the argument there. He's saying that, when you have to figure out when a guy is going to be coming back, should I hold him, should I not? That's not fun, and that is true. His other point, though, is, when you reduce the player pool because you have an IL slot, right? Your replacements are now deeper. That's not fun also. So I do understand that point. When you have Ronald Acuna, and Ronald Acuna is out for the year, it's a really easy decision in NFBC to just cut, right? And if that's the type of injury, well, you're much better off having no IL slots because the replacement level is going to be better, right? You're replacing Acuna with a better player. If you had the IL slots, you'd have to replace him with a deeper player. So yes, in that scenario, you're much better off not having IL. But if you're talking about a team who has like Luis Robert, you're now hamstring because you're not dropping Luis Robert. You're now hamstrung that you either have to cut him, which is terrible, or you'd have to now pick up nobody, and you don't even get anybody. So, the IL, having an IL, it hurts certain people. It helps certain people. It's not 100% clear who it is. I think it helps more than it hurts, but John Posma is right in that it really does. There are points for and against it.
Well, remember a couple of years ago when one of our NFBC teams, we had Noah Syndergaard, and we did not want. He got injured pretty early in the season, and we did not want to drop him because we didn't want someone else to get him. So he was a wasted roster spot for us for how many months? 3-4 months.
Yeah.
So I think that's the injury that people are really most concerned about. Not the Acuna. Acuna, he's out for the year,
right?
Or someone who has Tommy John out for the year. That's not the question. The question is the guys in the middle, the guys who are going to be out for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. Do you drop them with the level? Are you gonna? That's what it comes down to. And I think it's a fine line. Like I mentioned, having fun. There is some sort of entertainment here, but a lot of people have a lot of money on the line, so it's not just fun. There's a lot of money on the line.
I understand I understand the argument. Well, I'd rather pick up a guy from a better player pool than from the bottom of the pool, and it's so deep if you have IL. But I want to ask you, Ruvain, you're the injury guy. What happens more often? Is it the season-ending injuries for these guys, or is it the I'm out a few weeks, or I'm out. We don't know how long this pitcher's going to be out. Like, which occurs more? To me, it's got to be the less severe one. There aren't that many injuries, right?
Of course, yeah. More people are just injured for a shorter period of time than a longer. That's the obvious thing. Otherwise, if someone gets hurt once, they're out for the entire year. But now you have a question like, let's say you have someone like Juan Soto who has an injured forearm. He hasn't played the last couple of days. The Yankees are saying, okay, then it's not a problem. Maybe he'll go on IL. Yes, he'll go on IL. But the last time they've had this issue, I think we mentioned this before. Jason Dominguez, they said yes, he was fine, and all of a sudden he has a tear. So this is the type of guy where you're going to hold on to him. You're going to hold on to him. You're going to hold on to him. If you're at an IL spot, you stick him on the IL spot, no problem. But right now, he's wasting a spot. He's not going to be in your lineup. He's a high caliber player, and right now you have literally nobody to replace him, and you have a dead spot in your roster.
Yeah, and for all the people who say, "Well, you got to make a shrewd decision," well, I mean, we don't have perfect information as to their injury, so you're asking us to make a decision on just an unknown. I'd rather pick up a deeper guy than have nobody, right? I just think that for all the Acuñas and Spencer Striders that are out for the year, there's just much, much, much more use of the, who knows, Nolan Jones, Luis Robert, Eduardo Rodriguez. There's so many people that I'd rather just stash and pick up somebody. I'm holding Eduardo Rodriguez in a league. In an NFBC league, I think in TGFBI. I mean, I guess I could have dropped him, sure, but why? Why should I have to do that? All right, let's go to more comments. Matt Cedarholm, friend of the podcast, says, with no IL slots, injuries hit twice. First, you lose a good player, and second, your bench slots are now taken up by guys who aren't playing 100%.
Yep, 100%. That's the whole issue, and that's what we're running into, and that's the crux of this whole problem.
On the other side, Jay Tazawa says, imagine how awful that fab pool looks after you add IL slots in a 15-team. Tough cut stashes are part of the game. Right, that's that side. But again, I'd rather have a crappier player than no player.
But if you're doing fab on a weekly basis, you see the people who are available there. Those guys who are available when you put in your waiver wire picks, not all the guys you put on the waiver wire are taken, and there's still people left over the week after week after week after week. So there are people available. It's not like it's going to be completely barren because MLB has to bring up guys when people are injured also. So you're getting more guys added to the player pool anyway. So yes, it's getting a little bit lower, but you may hit someone and get one of those guys who breaks out because of an injury also.
Bullpen Guru says, and when 30 less players are on the wire because teams are utilizing 2 IL spots, the ability to piece together production lost from Acuña example is that much harder. So yes, that's the example that we talked about. That yes,
but you can't replace Acuña. That's impossible.
Yeah, right.
He was 1-1. You can't replace that.
Right. But of course, if you don't have the IL, you're getting a guy 30 players higher on the replacement level, right? It is an argument.
So then maybe have I know you're in Tout Wars. In Tout Wars, I think don't you have a league where you're able to get some refunded fab money?
Yeah, fab reclaim, right? So there are other ways to mitigate losses like that. Have some fab reclaim. That if you lose a guy, you get X dollars of fab so that you have more. Sure, there are ways that would actually mitigate it. If you want to have no IL slots. Sure, maybe give fab reclaim. If you drop a guy who's high enough on the IL, high enough on the totem pole, then you get some fab reclaim. Right, there are ways to mitigate that.
It just makes it much more complicated for a certain platform to do it. That's the issue. That's very hard to do.
Right. I'm less concerned about complicated for what I want to enjoy and more about fairness. Adam Warner says leagues with ILs tend to have shorter benches anyways. I like the NFBC system better. It's an interesting part of the game, making decisions on IL guys. So one suggestion, of course, I have is, okay, have 2 IL spots, make one less bench, make it 6 bench. But this way, you don't have to make these tough decisions on the unknowns, and you still have that much league penetration. Or make it 14-team league instead of 15. This way, you're not as deep.
But we're making these tough decisions every week anyway. Like, let's say coming into this past week, Ranger Suarez had an injured hand. We didn't know whether or not to play him. So yet, if you have to make the decision every week whether you're going to play an injured guy if they're not on the aisle or not, you don't know when they're going to come back. He came back, he pitched, he got a win, and people who kept him on the bench, like myself, didn't get that win. But these are tough decisions you have to make on a weekly basis. This
Oh
is,
yeah.
week to week is one thing, but this is more of a month to month basis decision.
Yeah,
That's the
there's no
difference.
doubt that you have to make tough decisions, but when a guy is on the IL, you literally cannot play him, or there's no reason to play him because he's going to get you a 0. So,
Right.
Different types. All right, here's a couple comments from Phil Dussault, and Phil Dussault is a fantastic player. He won the main event and auction championship all in the same year, a couple years ago. He definitely knows what he's talking about. So let's listen to what he has to say. He says, adding IL slots would just make it worse for teams with injured players. There'd be no one available in FAB, and replacement value would be much lower. We've covered that point already. Again, I disagree that I'd rather have a crappier guy than nobody. He says, I'd much rather have 7 bench spots and can do whatever I want with them, much more flexibility. Everyone has injuries anyway, so adding 1 or 2 IL slots while removing bench spots has very little impact. It just makes it more complicated to manage and creates frustration. I definitely disagree wholeheartedly. If you add, well, everyone has 2 injuries. Not all injuries are created equally. If you have guys who you're unsure of or are going to be out for a while, it's different than a guy who's out for a week, or different than a guy who's going to be out for 4 months, right? Not all IL is created equally, and the uncertainty, to get rid of some of that uncertainty is a big advantage and much more fun. So I don't agree with that, Phil.
And even if you have 2 IL slots, how many teams have more than 2 people who are injured? I mean, yes, you could 2 people on IL, but you still have to make a decision about those other guys. Those other injured guys may end up getting dropped anyway also.
Phil continues, what if Acuna tears his ACL in May, and instead of being able to piece things together, platoon bats, there aren't any outfielders who play more than twice a week available in FAB? Again, we did talk about that. Yes, in the Acuna, in the Strider, anybody who's out for the year, it obviously is better and more fair for the person to have a higher level replacement. But those are few and far between. The crappier decisions come up way more. He says, in all my NFBC leagues, I have between 1 and 6 players on the IL who are on my bench. I'm guessing everyone is at the same, so I'm not sure what replacing 1 or 2 bench spots with IL would accomplish. That, again, I addressed that point. Most people play 10 or 12s, so I get it in those, but not 15s. Okay, so he's basically saying that it's just that the 15-team depth is just so crappy that by doing that kind of league penetration is just too much. And again, I say to you, Phil, play 14-team league or make it 6 bench and 2 IL. There are ways to make it so that you access the right level player pool, but it's much more fair on the whole.
But the problem with that is that then you have no lineup flexibility. If you have all those injured guys on your bench, wouldn't you rather have somebody on your bench that you can maybe put in for half a week or something like that?
Yeah.
It gives you no flexibility. You're stuck with the same lineup, and if those guys aren't performing the way they're supposed to, then you want to flip someone out. You can't.
Yeah, the flexibility, I don't get that comment. It's more flexible to have the IL than not to have the IL. I'm sorry, I don't get that. Phil then says, this is an interesting comment. I've never played in leagues with IL slots, so I may not understand it fully. But in a league with 2 IL slots, are there any teams right now who aren't using them? Okay. Phil, if you've never played in a league with IL slots, I mean, you probably should. You probably should give it a shot. And again,
Try to see the difference. That's all.
Yeah, I value your opinion either way, Phil. But I mean, I guess you're not talking from experience. Others are, but you can still make it's still a fair comment for you to make all these. It would be better if you had experienced it. All right, Scott Genstad, also a fantastic NFBC player. Jumps in. No, I agree. Every team will have 2 IL slots. I agreed with it as well. So he says, right, so then what's the case for IL slots over bench if everyone's IL slots are full? Again, it's for those guys who you're uncertain about. And I responded on Twitter, because for teams with excessive injuries, you get additional players to fill in if you can stash in the IL. Say you have Luis Robert, Nolan Jones, and Francisco Alvarez on one team, like I do. Having the IL slots even out the unfortunate luck. Well, then Phil says, if that's the goal, then the argument should be for fewer bench spots, but unlimited IL slots. Limited IL slots don't accomplish anything since everyone uses them equally. Yeah, I'm for having more. To me personally, I'm for unlimited IL. I can understand if that is a little bit too much league penetration, so make it limited 2, 3, 4. But yeah, a fewer bench spots and more unlimited IL, that actually I think would be a touch better.
Well, see, this is where I like to lean toward the no IL slots because when people have to drop these injured players, I mean, last year we picked up Brian Mountcastle because of injuries, stuff like that, and we picked up other Nolan Jones.
Yeah, we
later
got
in the year
Nolan
also.
Jones in one waiver wire period, and by the way, we were blessed because we had Fab, so we happened to get Ryan Mountcastle and Nolan Jones back healthy. I mean, that was a huge advantage. Why in the world we were all saying, why the hell are they in the player? Why should we have those guys?
But it's also another area of strategy where how much money of fab are you going to spend on these guys coming back? Like let's say right now, Francisco Alvarez, I'm sure he's available in like I'd say 20 or 30% of leagues right now. He's coming back in a couple of weeks. How much money are you going to spend on Fab? I think it adds another aspect of strategy when it comes to using your fab money.
Yeah,
should you save fab money to pick up injured guys who are coming back just to stash if you have room? If you're lucky and you have room and you want to stash them, by all means do it. It just adds another area of strategy.
But I find if your team is tending to do well, and if your team is blessed with fewer injuries, you're going to have more fab. So you're almost getting double penalized. If you have a lot of injuries, your team's not doing well, you're going to have low fab. So you can't pick back these players up. I think you're doubly penalized in that way. I'd much rather have everyone more on equal footing where Ryan Mountcastle and Nolan Jones are available to us. Whoopee, we got Fab, great. I mean, yippee for us, but that wasn't fair.
How many fantasy players give up after their fab is very low and they have no room in their roster?
That's also true.
If they give up, then the quality of competition goes down, and people are not they're not playing the way that we're playing in the beginning of the year, and it throws off the entire league. If you have one of those 2 extra slots, maybe it's a little bit better. But like I mentioned on the pod the other day, this is all luck to begin with. If you're picking, like I mentioned, Francisco Lindor, you don't expect him to bat 200. You expect him to bat higher than that. You don't expect certain players to have off years or bad years. So there's some sort of luck playing into this anyway. You're adding in the even more luck of the injury aspect, and that's it hampers it more.
ESPN used to have, or they probably still do, undroppables, where if a player's a certain level,
Yahoo has that also.
So that you can't pick them up. But there shouldn't be players of a certain level in the player pool. Period. So it's another reason that I'm against it. You should not have players that are $10 or more, or $15 more, whatever bar you want to set.
Well, aren't you in a league also? Or you were in the past in a league where if you drop somebody and they're a certain level of player that they're not able to be picked up by anybody else.
Right, that's it. Yeah, the ESPN type. I think RT Sports does. If you drop somebody last month, you can't
in September.
Pick them up,
in September. Yeah.
All right, Scott Genstad jumps in again. Full agree with Phil here. I much prefer no IL slot. I have played in many and prefer none each time. No right or wrong, just personal preference. So again, there's 2 questions here about the IL. It's one, what is your preference, right? It's okay if you enjoy it more. God bless you. I don't, but it's okay if you do. But then there's another question of which is more fair, which is, take some more luck away. And to me, that's a separate question. And I think there's no question that you reduce the luck by having the IL slots. Again, you might not prefer it. It might be strategy. But it's a different question whether it's less variable. I cannot fathom how it's not.
Either way, when the player gets injured, your chances of winning obviously go down, but you're at least able to make up a little bit. Have the replacement level value at some sort of level instead of no level.
Aaron K says, adding IL just lowers the variance, gives better players more of a chance. Without IL, some lesser player like myself has a shot. Yeah, that's exactly the point I'm making, that you're just giving more opportunity. If you are unlucky because you've got an injured player, you should be less penalized. It actually evens the playing field. It makes the better players who drafted well better. Aaron says, LOI, I've heard you argue more for IL on your pod. Immediately thought, RL, you would do better with IL. Haha, nice to have you engaged. Love all your pods. Thank you, Aaron, for enjoying our pods. And yes, I agree. Scott says, IL spots are better than non-IL spots, but we should have more rules around them to prevent people adding dudes for free just to stash. Have to be drafted or acquired in a trade, or have been healthy when you added them from the wire. Not as bad in Fab, but still, I just don't like the way it influences roster decisions and possible advantages. I've got a keeper league with 3 IL spots and 4-star caliber players currently injured, so I have to either eat an active roster spot or hand a valuable asset to another team for free. So the other point, though, is that you do need to have some rules around the IL. Like, I don't think And in some leagues, I know Yahoo leagues allow it. You can just add right to an IL. That I don't agree with. I think that you should not be allowed to add right into IL, stash a kind of guy. I think that for IL, you have to draft it right onto your team, so you either have to have an open spot or an add drop. You can't use the IL as a pure stash in that manner.
Right, and we were actually talking about this. I think it was yesterday before we were taping this, and we were saying, well, why don't we have a rule where if you draft a person during the draft, those people are allowed to go on the IL, and that's it. If you pick up anyone from Fab, you don't have to. You're not allowed to do that. I think that makes it a little bit more fair because those are the guys that you can't. Those are the guys you have to make a tough, really, really tough decision on. Those are the guys you're saying, well, if I keep them or should I not keep them? I need their value, but those are the guys who are the ones that are quote unquote invaluable for you, and those are the guys that you need to make that decision. And if you have the extra spot, then maybe that's a better way of mitigating the fact that you're going to be dipping deeper into the Fab.
Oh yeah, totally. That is an interesting rule, and I'd be for that. By the way, I'm also for having midweek replacements for IL. Guy goes on the IL, replace him in your lineup. Like I have no problem with doing that. I think that also is a way to mitigate it.
That's true, but I mean, NFBC already has 2 lineup locks. I think that's enough, and it's just for the hitters. I wouldn't do for the pitchers because the pitchers are extremely variable. Pitchers can get hurt if someone blows on their elbow the wrong way. So I'm a little bit 2 lineups is fine, and if they're injured already, you can spend 3 days with those injured guys in your lineup. Sometimes that's just bad luck.
Couple more comments. Jono says the case is you have more players and flexibility. If you held Royce Lewis, you had less flexibility in your squad. If you had an IL spot, at least you have the option to pick up somebody, start them even if they aren't that good. Agree. Griffin says limit IL spots doesn't accomplish anything. Says the guy who's never played with IL slots. He's now commenting on Phil Dussault. IL slots are designed to create a fair playing environment for those teams with a flurry of undroppable players so that they don't play shorthanded. Agree totally, man. I quite like the NFBC 7-bench non-IL format, though. I just took exception to this comment. He was referring to Phil saying he never played it and wanted to jump in the ring. Rob DiPietro comments, also a great NFBC player. I like the format as is, as I have other leagues with ILs to experience that gameplay. LOL at the guy who has never played in one. Haha. I don't like seafood, but I also have never eaten it. Okay, it's interesting there, but yeah, Phil can comment on it. It's just funny that he did. All right, here's Jeff Zimmerman.
Well, he can comment because he's only played one way, so he knows that you can win with injured players the way Fab is the way it is. That's his point that he's insinuating is that you don't need an IL spot to put someone on there to be able to win the whole thing.
Oh yeah, totally. But I will say though, Ruvain, that teams that have less injuries are the teams that tend to do better. Would you agree?
Yes, and that's just luck. Injuries a lot of times are just luck.
Yeah, so IL minimizes it. IL minimizes it.
IL does minimize it, but at the same point, it thins out the whole player pool for you for picking up players for the rest of the season.
Jeff Zimmerman says, typical Jeff Zimmerman line, then just go draft and hold. Okay, Jeff.
Great, yeah, that solves it. Yeah.
I think it's okay to recommend an IL spot. Not that I just have to do draft and hold. There's still waivers. Waivers are still a thing that I like. Right, draft and hold. There's no waivers. I do enjoy the aspect of waivers. I just want to be able to waiver for a guy who's injured, man. So thank you for the comment, Jeff. Michael De Cavalante. We've played in some leagues with him in the NFBC. He says, IL slots only for players that were active on your roster, but then go on the IL, not for drafting or fabbing IL players. Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
Brian Jenner says, timing of when players are officially put on IL is luck. Adding 2 IL slots and removing 2 bench slots is pointless. Most teams have 2 IL guys at any time. To remove luck, give extra fab to players with major injuries. Drop a first rounder and get 250. Fifth rounder gets 75. Yeah, these are good suggestions. Fab reclaim, and we do this in Tout Wars and Fab. I think it totally makes it more fair.
But if you do the Fab reclaim, then you have to drop that injured player, and then you should make a rule that player can't be picked up by anybody else because that ruins the whole point of it.
Yeah. All right, so those are the comments. A bunch of stuff to consider there. I haven't heard any argument, Ruvain. I have to tell you, I haven't heard any argument that I sort of see that trumps any of mine. Yes, there are situations where I agree there's more luck in the Acuna Strider situation. I understand it's a preference, but I do not see a good enough argument that tells me that having IL spots is a better game. I think it is. It's definitely a more fair game. It definitely helps the way that I play personally, and I just don't buy any of the stuff there. And to Greg, if you're listening to the show, and we'll show you the results of these things. It isn't actually clear that people do not want the IL. I believe that people actually do. Who are already playing in the NFBC, I'd say there's a very high percentage who would enjoy it, and definitely for people who aren't in the NFBC, it is absolutely. I mean, what was it, like 9-1 almost, right?
Yeah, I mean, people do seem to want it, but it seems like it's 50, almost I'd say 50-50 that people want it in the NFBC. I think people are used to the NFBC. It's the old school. And yes, baseball's changing. The rules in baseball are changing. There are more injuries now, probably because the rules are changing, also because of the pitch clock. Pitchers are pitching faster. They're getting hurt more. Players are not able to recover quicker between pitches. Maybe that's playing into it also. So the injuries are on the rise for the most part for the past 10, 15 years. So maybe...
Doesn't that help the situation, right? The cost of the game is changing. Wouldn't it be better?
Yes, it should, but it's very hard to change something that's been around for a very long time and have everybody happy about it. That's the whole thing. If you keep it the way it is, you're keeping the people on the IL not happy, and if you change it, you're going to keep the old school people who don't like the IL not happy. So there is maybe there may be a happy medium where you just create a format where you have the eligibility of, let's say, a 12-team league with a 2-player IL. This way the FAB is not crazy, that the waiver wire is not too crazy, so you're expanding the rosters, but you have less teams. I think there are ways to work around it. The way NFBC has it right now, I actually like it. I like the way it is, and I think it should be kept that way. Should they add other types of competitions that have an IL? That may be interesting, because if all of a sudden you see a lot of players join that type of league and you see the popularity in that type of league, then you may want to consider adding the IL to other leagues.
Well, maybe we should have the Beat the Shift format on the NFBC platform. Maybe we should petition Greg to.
That's as long as we get a cut, then I'll be happy about it. Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, and the question of the IL is different from like the changed batting average to OVP. That's very different. I mean, that's a game, and that's a category preference. We know that some categories are more luck, some others, but of course, it's your strategy for doing it. IL is very different. I mean, you can't plan for this.
Actually, you can. That's what you can by how you draft and how you manage your team. If you're
sure,
we mentioned this before. If you know you have an oft injured player and you want to get a backup at a higher level as opposed to a lower level, just as quote unquote insurance. Luis Robert seems to be on the IL a lot. What's his name? Jazz Chisholm seems to be on the IL a lot. There's certain guys who always end up on the IL at some point in the season, even if for a short period of time. But when you draft these players, that's going to happen, or you have an idea that's going to happen. And I mean, doesn't Ron Chandler have the whole thing with his system that there's a certain rating of injury, and you should just pick up your players that you're picking as their replacements on your bench at a higher level, so you can be able to replace them. You won't have to dip into the waiver wire.
Yep. Yeah. Point taken. All right. Any other last comments? I think we really fleshed this out pretty much. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This is a little bit different kind of pod. One topic that we just gave a lot of different things, but I thought the discussion on Twitter was really a good one. It was all positive, and there was nobody personally bashing. It was everyone just giving their intellectual opinions honestly, and we appreciate that. And thank you everyone for listening to the show and engaging with us. Really appreciate it. And it was really great having Greg. Greg's and by the way, this is all nothing negative about Greg. I mean, this is just a format preference, and we love Greg. Greg is one of the nicest guys out there, and he really cares about everybody, really.
And listen, it's a good debate because both sides are wrong and both sides are right. There's no, it's a matter of preference. It's a matter of how you think you play the game and what type of format you're more comfortable with. And I think that's what it comes down to, because if you're not comfortable without an IL slot, then you're not going to play in the NFBC. If you're comfortable with an IL slot, then you play anywhere but NFBC. There's certain things, so there's no right, there's no wrong. There's a lot of good debate, and I think we should keep the debate up.
Absolutely. All right, well, that's it for this episode. We will not have our regular waiver wire and stuff. We're actually recording this much earlier in the week. We can't do a pod on our usual time, so we're giving you some stuff, some content here, but we will be back in about a week and a half with our regular stuff. Ruvain, what's going on with you?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come. You can also catch my weekly article on Rotoballer discussing all these injuries and whether or not you should stash them on the IL, whether you should drop them and everything like that. I mean, this keeps me in business, right?
Yep, that's true. That's true. All right, I'm Ariel Cohen. You can see my stuff over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer, on Twitter at ATCNY, and of course, listen to us right here on the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. All right, once again, thank you everyone for giving your comments, for the great discussion. Ruvain, thanks so much for coming on this weekend episode. We're recording this on the weekend. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.